Good afternoon, everybody. We're here on this first day of summer, and the first summer of the next 1,000 years. And there's an awful lot of history in this room, and we have lived quite a bit of it. And we're here to share it with you. So I'd like, first of all, to welcome my guests, the Baker girls, as they have been known in Brentwood.
Right.
And I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves individually to you all. And we'll get a story told here today. Ruth, why don't you begin by introducing yourself?
Okay, I'm Ruth Baker Bernhardt, and I was born in South Ozone Park and moved to Brentwood when I was 3 years old. The rest is history.
And you were only 3 years old when you
Yes.
moved to Brentwood. Now, have you lived in Brentwood all your life?
Well, except for 2 years when I was first married, I lived in Bay Shore.
Okay, so we really do have some stories to hear about from you. And why don't you pass the
Okay.
I'm Eleanor Baker Bazata, and I was born in Brentwood on Clark Street, up there by the high tension poles. It was the pole road.
Right.
And I've lived in Brentwood all my life. I haven't moved out.
So this is your big sister.
This is my big sister.
And how
yes.
many, if you don't mind my asking, how many years difference are there between the two of you?
I'll let her tell that.
Aha, okay, all right. Did you learn a lot from your
Yes.
sister?
And talk about role models. And she
Yeah.
was mine.
Is that right?
Yes.
You both eventually worked for the Brentwood school system.
That's right.
Yes.
Why don't we talk about some of your earliest memories of Brentwood then, and some of those formative years, those formative experiences that have made you who you are today?
Well, I began school when I was 5 years old. I went to a two-room school on 3rd Avenue. And in those days, there were no busing, so we walked about 1.25 miles to school and home again. And it stayed as two-room school through my elementary school teaching until the year that I graduated. They added the new rooms on.
Now, I want to interrupt to say that those of you listening out there will probably recognize the building that Ruth is talking about. It is now part of the Brentwood Library.
That's right.
But when Ruth is talking about it, it was only a two-room schoolhouse.
Right.
Could you describe the inside of it at that time? What it looked like?
Well, for youngsters, it was an enormous two rooms, and we had the 1st through the 4th grade in one room, and the 5th through the 8th grade in the 2nd room, like 1st or 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
And big windows, oiled floors, wood floors that were oiled. The lavatory, or basement as we call it, was downstairs. One side of the building was for the boys, one side for the girls.
Mm-hmm.
When the weather was inclement, we always kept the boys and girls separated. We would go down there for recreation or recess, or to eat your lunch.
How did you know when the school day began? I have to ask this, was there a bell that
There was a
somebody
bell,
rang?
a big bell. I thought it used to be outside the library for a while.
I remember when I first began teaching, it was outside the library.
That's right.
Yes.
That was the bell that
But they had it mounted on a brick.
Yeah, but this was up in a tower on the top of the building.
So that the sound carried.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Well, you were sure to be there by 9 o'clock. And the teaching principal would be the one that supervised all that. She would ring the bell and line up outside on the ground, and I think were 11 steps to go up to the building.
Now, how many students? You were not in that school at that
No.
time.
Not that particular.
Okay.
They built on before I went there.
You came later on
Yes.
when the school had. I guess the school had been enlarged by the time
Yes.
you
Oh,
got
yeah.
there. But when you were there, Ruth, how many students would have
I
been
would say between 15 and 20 through the first through the 8th grade when I started.
Right.
But before I graduated, they took a big canvas curtain and separated the big room, we call it, 5th through 8th grades. And we had 5 and 6 in one and 7 and 8 in the other. The only thing keeping us from each other was this big canvas. And that's when the school began to expand. Yeah.
And I guess the demographics of Brentwood began to change.
Oh, they did, yeah.
People began to move out here. That must have been, what year now are we talking about?
Well, and I graduated from 8th grade in 1932.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the Depression years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You probably had a picture of President Roosevelt in someplace in that
Oh,
building
yeah.
too, I'm sure, was there.
Yeah.
I was thinking that, wondering who put the flag up in the morning? Was that the custodian's job, or
We
did a student
but the
have
custodian wasn't a permanent person. He used to come in early in the morning and in the wintertime make the fire, stoke the fire so it would be warm.
So it was a coal fire.
Right. And he would put the flag up. And then at the end of the day, he would return and, I guess, clean the building and take the flag down. But it was necessary that way.
Eleanor, how is this description different from your impression?
Well, by the time I began school, which probably was about 1934 or 5, first grade, they had built 2 more rooms on the school. So rather than 4 classes in one room, we had 2. 1st and 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th and 8th.
So that was kind of an open classroom before the term had even been invented, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah. Where you're sharing.
I picture a big class, but because there were 2 classes together, I could never tell you how many children were in each class.
Mm-hmm.
But there were 2 teachers in the room at the time.
And that's team teaching before there were teams, right? Before there was such a term.
Right.
So this would have been now in the late 30s?
I would say 35. I was born in 1929, and I would say 1934 I began school. Mm-hmm. So it would be then. And Lee Stewart was the superintendent, the principal, and one of the teachers, I guess, of 6th and 7th and 8th grade. Principal.
Yes. But isn't that where the term originally came from? The principal was the principal teacher. He was a teaching.
I guess that's probably what it was. Yeah.
And later on, then the administrative role became separate from the teaching role, and sort of the realities of teaching in a classroom and being an administrator. Were there any dress codes or dress requirements of students when you went to school?
Except for phys ed, they call it now. I forget what we call it.
You weren't allowed to keep your snow pants on in school.
No.
You were or you weren't?
You were not allowed to keep your snow pants on.
Uh-huh.
And they were hard to get on and off when you were in the 1st grade. Teacher did
right.
not help. Had no aides to help.
No. Aides.
Now, forgive my naivete, but is this with buttons or with zippers or
clasps? Oh, yeah, zippers
or
up the side.
Zippers up the side.
A little bib. Buttons here. Mm-hmm. You learned how to put your clothes on early.
I remember zippers associated with the galoshes that.
Yeah, the sides of the snow pants had zippers.
Do you recall the winters in Brentwood being different from?
Yes. Oh, yes. They were more severe.
They were more severe.
Yes.
No.
Give me a story or a recollection of a winter in particular that from your childhood in Brentwood. Tell us about snow removal, for example.
That's one thing about Brentwood in those days. The snow removal seemed to be pretty good, but there were hardly any streets.
Yeah. And the snow removal, I'm sorry.
Just whoever did it was there right away to be removing it.
They would have a horse with a V-plow like this, that they would go down the street and make one path. So mostly to walk. There weren't that many people with cars.
There weren't.
No.
Well, particularly because of, and the Depression too, had a lot to do with people's economic ability to.
They didn't have any snow days at school, for sure. I mean,
there weren't any snow days.
If there was snow, you went to school anyhow. There wasn't. If there was a hurricane, you went to school the next day.
You just might have gotten there a little bit late because it took you longer that day.
Tree in a way or something. That's right.
There were no buses and no cars to take you to school. You walked it. Was Brentwood, I don't want to say larger, but was it closer together in terms of the accessibility to the school than today? Brentwood seems like a huge community.
Well, it's 21 square miles is the Brentwood School District. When we were kids, I remember my dad.
21 square miles?
Right.
Has that still remained
I think so.
the
For other
definition of-
schools are.
I remember children from Edgewood that came to Brentwood, and children from, well, of course, we called it,
Loretta Park.
right. I mean, it was a big area, but there were less houses, fewer children.
Mm.
So probably 1 or 2 school buses did the whole.
But
Right.
before school buses, we walked that. The Loretta Park
Yes.
people came, all centrally located at what is the library now.
What I'm curious about some of the earliest memories that you both have. Now, granted, there is a few years separation between you, but can you tell me what are some of your earliest childhood memories?
I was luckier than Ruth when it came to the school buses. We didn't have a school bus, but a taxi came to pick me up.
I beg your pardon.
Yes, a taxi.
7-passenger taxis, yeah, that.
Because of where we lived, there weren't that many children that were going to school.
You mean
from
to
that
say
area.
Your parents provided
No,
that
the
was
school district
the school
provided,
district
yes.
provided you with a taxi to school.
my dad was responsible for that.
How so? Why?
Well, he was very
Actually, he
involved.
was the president of the school board at one time, back in the
Your
30s.
dad was president of the
Yes.
school board.
Back in the 30s.
Do you think he would have gotten in trouble today if he had a taxi come and pick up
Oh,
his
yes.
own?
But this
But it wasn't
they
just his
had to be
own.
agreed. It wasn't just his own kids. You know.
Oh, it wasn't just.
No,
his
there
own?
were other
What-
children.
Oh,
If you
I
lived a
see.
certain distance away from the school, then you know.
Oh, well, that's the equivalent of a bus today, then, I guess.
Right,
It was
That's
a-
all, rather
But it was the
than
same
have a
taxi
bus.
man. That first they came and picked them up and took them to school, and then they went because it only carried 7 people.
Yes. So he'd have to do
Yeah,
7 at a
couple-
time
right,
and make
right.
several trips.
Mhm.
There must have been sufficient numbers of students then living far enough
Right.
away
Oh, yeah.
that that
At the age to
became
go.
essential to
Yeah.
do. Okay. Were there adults in your growing up, other than mom and dad, that had an important position as role models in your life that you learned a lot from? That either you attach yourself to, or that they took a particular interest in you individually or as sisters?
I don't know.
It's hard to say.
I would say our older siblings, I would say would be a role model for myself, my older sister and brother.
Okay, were there 4 of you in the family? Is that
There were 4 and 4 more.
There were 8 of us,
After
and
they
there were,
moved
8
here.
in the family?
8 altogether, right.
there were 4 when we moved to Brentwood, and then there were 4 more.
Okay,
One here.
so I guess the older ones tend to take care of the
That's
younger
right,
ones and
yeah.
so on. Yeah. Tell me, your dad's time as a president of the school board must have occupied a lot of his time also.
Yes.
It did, but he was always anxious. He was very civic-minded, you know. And
Do you have any memories of his activities when you were children, as what he did as a board president, or?
not really. I think we were really too young to
remember?
They didn't involve you in that.
No.
No.
So I'm just wondering whether any of the meetings took place in your house, or did?
Oh,
No,
no.
they took place at the school, you know, the school building.
I do remember a lot of contention.
Do you?
A lot of contention, but
Yeah.
more than not knowing what it was about, really, you know, it's more or less.
Contention between your dad and
And
other
probably other
people.
yes,
Mhm.
yeah.
Gee, I don't think that has changed too
No,
much.
I don't think so either.
I think that's what makes the world go round.
Who influenced your ultimate decision to do what you did? I mean, you became a secretary. A matter of fact, Ruth, you were the head secretary in Northeast
That's right.
Elementary. And you worked in the library.
Yes.
And what was your role in the library? And what library was it?
It was
Eleanor?
Northeast School
You were
Library.
also in Northeast.
Yes.
Now,
And
let me interrupt to say that Northeast, at the time you were both there, must have been one of the newest and biggest
Yes,
schools
It was
in,
two
very
in the
big.
buildings,
In
Brentwood
fact, it was
schools.
split session when I began there in 1961. They were on split session.
And
with
you
a
had
couple
already
of the
been
grades,
working
yes.
since '54.
there. Okay.
I started out as an X-ray technician, but
Was
after
that-
I had my children, I didn't prefer to go back to that particular profession. It's an on-call type of profession.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard of the opening in the school. It was only a part-time library, and it was a little room. I can't explain it. The room was not bigger than,
A cloak
I don't
room.
know. Do you remember that room, Karen?
Yes.
No, I don't think
They
so.
had books lining the walls to the top. and children came 7 at a time into the library to borrow a book. I had to keep them for 2 weeks because there wasn't enough time for them to come back and exchange on a half-day basis, which I was on. That was the library in the school. That's
So you might say you were the head librarian at that point then in the.
No, they had a head librarian. They had a person they hired who was a librarian who oversaw everything that we did.
And who was
Sarah
that?
Corman, her name was.
Sarah Corman,
yes.
I see. Okay. All right.
And she taught us just the way a librarian would run things, or the way we were taught. We read stories to the children, talked to them about books, told them how to find books, which we're not allowed to do any longer. I'm sure the library clerks are not allowed to do those things.
I'm curious, do librarians still read stories to children?
I don't think those people do because I was stopped from doing it. They didn't want me to do that.
And the reason for that was?
They thought that was a teacher's duty to do the reading to the children.
I beg your pardon. I see.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Of course, they had already been there 25 years when that happened.
Yes.
And had been doing it all those years.
Yes.
But they preferred me not to do it.
Okay.
So we stopped.
I guess what's going through my mind is that there have been years where the teaching profession, in defining itself, attempted to draw certain boundaries around what constitutes teaching and what are outside activities.
And the secretaries have done the same.
Yes.
We didn't want aides to come in and type. And so it had to be something that was the same type of thing.
Now, my question had been, what influenced your decision to go into it, and what I understand from what you're saying is when your children got of a certain age, you wanted something that was more
something to do, right?
Compatible with.
And then I loved it.
Yes, and you did.
And that was
my
favorite place, a book place.
Now, didn't you tell me at one time, Ruth, that you had watched them build Northeast, and you were in there the first year before the building was even completed?
That's right. That's right.
Talk about some of those memories of that experience.
I could see from my home when they started to build the building. And I knew they were probably going to need clerical help there. And I know Mr. Stewart because the younger children went to school there. So I wrote him a letter and asked, and he interviewed me and hired me for that job under Ralph Sakin, who was the principal at the time. But the construction wasn't completed. They were still men working there. They had a workman's shanty with a telephone in it. And in order to get any messages out, I had to go to the outside to the payphone and call down to the administration building, as we called it then.
You had to go out to a payphone.
Right, but right on the grounds.
Yes.
The workers use that.
Yes.
And then when children first started coming in September, the rooms weren't finished for them, but they had to come in order to get credit for the day. The bus brought them, dropped them off, took them in to the schoolroom, to the classrooms. In some cases, scaffolding was still in the halls. And they'd call the roll and then let the children go home. This went on for several weeks. And unfortunately, Mr. Sakin's mother passed away at the same time, so he, as principal, was called away from school, so he was absent the first about week and a half.
The school just opened now, the first week of school.
Right, right. Okay. So I, as a novice employee for the school district, struggled through it. Well, we managed, so everybody helped one another.
You made the necessary administrative decisions for that.
Well, sort of. I had to contact Mr. Stewart quite a bit.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Of course, the village school was already standing and had been used, and I guess Northeast came after the village school. Is that right?
Northeast and Southwest were built the same time. Opened the same year.
Mm-hmm.
And village school opened in 1940 because I went from the 5th grade in the 3 or 4 room schoolhouse to the village school was a.
And that was 1940?
Yes.
So now we're talking about the school was just brand new practically during the war years, during World War II. And didn't you have brothers that served also?
Oh yes.
In World War II.
Right.
One was a prisoner of war in Germany.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in his situation? What happened?
Well, he came home from there with shrapnel in his leg, but he came home, which is something.
Yes.
He was listed as missing in action for a very long time,
Really?
so we were fortunate to.
Do you have outstanding memories of what Brentwood was like during the war years? What specifics can you share with us about what it was like to be a young person in Brentwood during World War II? What are some of the memories? Weren't there flags that people had in some of their windows?
Oh, yeah.
Brentwood was like, yes, you were talking about patriotism and all that stuff, yes. My father was, and my father, in fact, Ruth, and was a four brothers, worked in Republic Aviation during World War II.
And that was in Farmingdale?
Yes.
Right.
And
as a matter of fact, not to get away from this, I want to come back to it, but didn't one of you, or maybe both of you, even have to take a train to complete your high school?
We both went to, well, I did.
She completed her high school in Farmingdale. I had the option, after 2 years in Farmingdale, to go to Bayshore because they opened Bayshore in 1945 to the Brentwood students. And my younger brother was going there. There was no question that he would have to. So my mother and father decided that I would go there too. So I left Farmingdale and continued the last 2 years of high school in Bayshore.
Well, that was in the assigned school.
Right.
What do you mean by the assigned school?
Well, when I graduated from school, there was no high school in Brentwood, so you had an option to either go to Central Islip or Farmingdale. And several of the parents chose Farmingdale, and we had to commute back and forth. And that still was in process when Eleanor graduated, and it would be 11 years later. So she started her high school years in Farmingdale also. And
then you took the train to the Brentwood station and you walked home?
We took the train from the Brentwood station to Farmingdale and walked from there to the Farmingdale High School, which was quite a distance. And then back in the evening, and then train home, and then walked home from there. There was no buses then for that.
No.
What I hear is that it was very difficult to get a high school education.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And at that time,
Right.
it was not easy for the average person to do. You had to extend yourself above and beyond it, really to be important to you to do. And perhaps...
And be an outsider, too, because it was never... The Brentwood children were here, or the Brentwood children were in Bayshore, or the Brentwood children were in Central Islip. It wasn't your own school, you know. It was just a different feeling altogether.
It wasn't really fun to sing Hail, Hail, Hail for all Farmingdale when you came from Brentwood.
Yeah.
When you played on a school team, you were Farmingdale against...
You were an outsider. Yeah.
Right.
So we actually didn't begin to develop our own identity as a school community until we had our own high school. That would have been the R.O.B.S building, which was built in the 50s, wasn't
That's right.
it?
Yeah. My son graduated in 61, and he was a senior then. He was the first one to attend that building. Other than that, they used to add a grade on a year until they completed the R.O.B.S building, and then he graduated from that building.
In 1961,
right.
As the first graduating class from the R.O.B.S building. So we've seen the transition in your lives from the 30s to the 40s. Actually, if you're born in the 20s,
right.
And then from the 30s, school, 40s and 50s to the R.O.B.S, and here we are into the new millennium already.
Right.
I was starting to ask you about World War II experiences, and we talked about your brother working for Republic, and that's how I got you away from that.
Actually, 4 brothers worked. 2 of them then one went to the Air Force, and he didn't spend too much time in the fighting area of the war. But the other, who was a draftsman doing blueprints, was drafted into the infantry. And about 6 months after he went into the service, he was a prisoner of war.
He was captured in the Battle of the Bulge. But my husband and this brother that Eleanor's speaking of went in the service on the same day. They were both inducted into the service. And my husband was a letter carrier, so they sent him to postal school. My brother had an important job in Republic, and they put him in the infantry. That's because of the difference in age.
I see, yes.
They were looking for young men for the infantry.
And again, Republic Aviation used to be one of the largest employers
right.
on Long Island
Right.
in the defense industry.
Right.
And we've seen many, many changes in that industry, just as we've seen many changes in the field of education that paralleled it. Some specific questions. Do you remember rationing?
Oh,
yes.
We still have the
Especially
old
cardboard
rationing books.
shoes.
You still have some of the rationing books?
The books, yeah, the books. The sugar,
The
coffee.
shoes didn't last more than a
Yeah.
month or two because you had, I think it was cardboard. I'm not quite sure what they call that material that they made shoes out of in those days. With a lot of children to put shoes on, it's hard to keep
Because
shoes.
the leather was requisition
Right.
for the
Whatever,
service.
yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember blackouts?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Blackout curtains, blackout.
The shades that.
Shades,
Also,
blackout on
the
your.
lights on the car.
I'll bet your father was also active as, as an air raid warden or some sort. Such
Fire warden.
Fire warden.
Sure. That's what he was too.
Yeah.
Because we lived in the middle of the woods, and that was a fear that we've had of fire. If you smell fire, that was like, oh, just pray that it's not coming your way.
And Brentwood is in the Pine Barrens.
That's the type of trees, though.
That's what
Those
we
pine
call,
trees
yeah.
were the type that if they started to burn, they just
go
burn
so
crazy.
fast.
Yeah, right.
Turpentine.
Yeah.
To burn
That's what
pine
we called
needles.
it, Brentwood in the Pines. In fact, Eleanor and I were just discussing on the way here. There was a song, and we always sang it, and I don't know why I don't remember all the words, but it was put to America the Beautiful.
Is that right?
There must be someplace in the library that there's words to that song.
And it
You
was
sang
about
that at
Brentwood?
every. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we sang it as our
What is
school
this
song.
town we're singing of? It's Brentwood in the Pine. It's a town we come to love. It's Brentwood in the Pine.
That's what we remember.
That's great. That's the first time I've ever heard of it. I didn't even know of its existence. You've got a wealth of specific memories, I'm sure, about not just the beginning of the war, but the end of the war, of the celebrations. That followed.
Our celebration was because our brother came home.
Yeah.
That was
Yes.
And I was nearly time for me to be graduating high school, so that was another, something to look forward to. It's a happy time.
Oh, for sure. Was there a day throughout any of this wonderful experience that you've accumulated that helped change your own sense of worth? Was there one particular day where something happened that changed the way you saw yourself?
Can't think of one over here.
Okay. All right. You had a lot of teachers growing up.
Yes.
Do you remember any one of them?
I
Or
do.
Can you talk about your
Florence
teachers?
Kohler was my first grade teacher. I'm trying to think if she also taught second grade in the same classroom. I'm not quite sure about that. I do remember her. I remember she lived a block over on Brentwood Road from the 3rd Avenue School. And she'd give each of us a turn to be able to walk to her house and bring her lunch every day. And then we could go in the bag and pick out a Malamar or whatever type. I remember that about Florence Kohler. Of course, I talk about look up. Those are the people that, while Florence Kohler, while I was working in the Northeast Library, she was still in the reading department in the school. And she used to come into the school and was still this person was my first grade teacher, kind of afraid to talk to her even. I mean, even though
There's a distance.
here I am 30 years old, and
oh, wow.
It's a different feeling. And also Dorothy Small Taylor, who also, she still lives in Brentwood, and she was my 3rd and 4th grade teacher. And we just had different feelings for the teachers in those days. It was not like children now come home and complain to their mom about this, and they wouldn't dare tell mom and dad about anything if there was a problem.
Flo Kohler was the 4th grade teacher, the opening of Northeast School in '54. She worked a couple of years there. Then I think she went into reading.
She did. She was I know she was a reading consultant.
That's
for a
how
long
I
time.
remember her. Her primary time being spent. Of course, we're talking about Florence Kohler. It brings to mind Kohler's Market, which was
Oh,
right
yes,
that was
adjacent to
it.
the old railroad station up in
Right.
Brentwood.
Right.
Her family had been here for her family, and her father's family, who had owned Kohler's Market, was the first, I guess, I wouldn't call it a supermarket, it was a grocery.
It was just
General
a general
store.
store, right?
That was her husband's family.
Yes.
yeah.
Did you shop there?
Oh,
Oh,
that's
yes.
the only place
Do
you
you
had to
have-
shop.
And
You
if
have
you wanted
memories of-
something from the store, that's where you went, unless you wanted to go to Bayshore, which was a big trip.
If you walked in the store right now, do you have a memory of what was on
I
your
do.
left and what
Yeah,
was
I
on
do.
your right? What,
They had
what
the
do you-
cans off the shelf. You didn't go do your own shopping. They picked things for you off the shelf behind the counter.
They had a candy counter, and you want one of these and one of those and one of that. My father used to go and buy a big bag of candy like that, 2 cent, 1 cent candy, and bring it home, 8 of it. Yeah. Kerosene cans, they sold kerosene cans. A gas pump out in front of the building to serve those who could afford, had a car and needed gas. But it wasn't where the most recent cola store was. It was in the block of that, I don't know the name of that hotel, whatever they call it. It's still there.
On Brentwood Road?
No, it's
on
across the
First-
way from the old
First
railroad
Avenue.
station, the big building that's
Yes.
there. It was
Yes.
a hotel.
Yes.
And
yes.
the lower part of it was the post office. And then there was a way to
Post
get
office was on the corner?
post of that building. Yeah.
Yes.
And then Cola's store was the last one in that building.
Mhm.
You went up a couple of steps to get into it. That's the Cola store that
Yes.
we were here when we first
Mhm.
came. But they did own that big building where Cola's store, general store, finally wound up.
That's the one I remember.
Huh? Yeah.
That is the one I remember.
That used to be a garage, a big garage that Cola's stored cars in for people. Summer people, I guess, people that came out for the summer and then left their cars here and went back to the city for the winter.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, so this was for many people. This was just a summer area. It was not a year-round residency.
Right.
They had small houses, I gather.
Yeah.
I suspect that all those houses are now year-round houses. There's no
Probably
way.
are,
Yeah.
yes.
And that, of course, was very close to the railroad station that only ran the old coal-burning
Locomotive.
It
locomotive.
started the fires on those pine trees
Right.
most of the time.
Sparks
Those
from
The
the
sparks
sparks
from-
flying
yes.
out. Yeah.
Also, on the ride to Farmingdale, you had a few cinders in your eye from the train.
The
Spent your
cinders.
time
Yeah.
picking cinders out of your
With
eye.
the open windows,
Yeah,
because there was
right,
no air
right.
conditioning, so the windows, the cinders would come in.
That's right.
That was not a heck of a lot different from the way it was even before the turn of the last
Probably.
century, when
Right,
you would ride
That's right.
and open and burn your clothes.
That's
Right,
right.
right.
Is there anything that we can talk about in terms of the interview for your job when you began working in Brentwood? Who is there? Somebody who you had mentioned that Mr. Stewart
Right.
interviewed you. Do you remember anything from the interview? Do you remember anything from your interview?
Not really.
Eleanor?
Mr. Stewart was my principal, my
Yeah.
teacher.
Uh-huh.
And so again, I probably just stood there and said, am I okay? And I just got the job.
And you got the job. I guess you were okay.
Yeah. There was no such thing as contracts or anything like
No.
that.
No.
This is before contract.
This was before contract. And I started out as a 10-month employee for $1,800 a year.
Before taxes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
And I
Right.
was lucky because I was a part-time employee for $1,300 a year.
Yeah.
That was in
And do you
1961.
remember how much you would get? Got a raise, for example, what your raise might be?
Very small.
Probably $29.
What?
Yeah.
About $29.
And the reason
That
I'm
was a
asking
lot.
is because I can remember for the first couple of years of my teaching, when I came to Brentwood in the early 60s, there was, this is before any kind of contractual negotiations. And if there was a time there that you got a $200 raise a year, and that was just the way it was. It was,
No, there wasn't anything automatic with the clerical help, non-teaching staff.
okay.
We finally formed our own organization, meeting at one another's house for a while. it didn't help much as far as any pressure on them.
Now, what organization would that have been?
What would we have called
I
it?
think we were civil service first,
Okay.
CSEA.
Mm-hmm.
And
No,
then
that was after we just got together as
Oh.
a group of ladies meeting in different houses.
Mm-hmm.
Because by that time, they already had, they call them middle school now, but they were junior high school.
Yes.
So those gals were included.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went to, like Eleanor said, civil service, CSEA.
Okay. So that's what it is today, too.
No, it's not.
It's not. What is it
No,
today?
because we belong to the BCA,
Okay. All right. So you.
Brentwood Clerical
Yes.
Brentwood Teachers.
Okay. That's why we're both under the New York State United
That's right,
Teachers
yeah.
umbrella. Yes. Okay.
But I wasn't included in that.
You were not.
No, because I retired before that became effective.
When did you retire?
1978.
All right. And
That
Eleanor?
began about 1980, but I retired in 1991.
I see.
I've been there.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So again, there's another chapter that we've experienced, that we've lived through, that covers a great many different changes,
Oh, yeah.
not just around us, but within the professions that we were identified with. This is perhaps is redundant, but your first impressions or early impressions of Brentwood as children, did you think anything about where you were living or how you felt about this? Do you have any recollection of what it felt like, or was it just the way life was and there was no particular?
Well, I can remember my mom. I don't remember doing it myself, but she said for the first 3 weeks I cried I wanted to go home because it was unfamiliar area.
Do you remember it being very quiet?
Oh, it was quiet, yeah. You could see all the stars because there were no street lights. Yeah.
And by the time I remember, we had a car. My parents would go to Bayshore and shop for their 2 weeks' groceries. I don't think Ruth, they didn't do that at the time, did they?
Not until then, yeah.
And so I got around more than.
Bayshore eventually became the shopping mecca, wasn't it?
That's
Isn't
right.
that where
Yeah.
people went to
Right,
do
Main
their
Street, Bayshore.
heavy shopping?
Mhm.
Right.
If you wanted clothes or anything, that's where you went.
Mm-hmm.
There was no place in Brentwood to buy clothing or shoes or any of those things. That was done in Bayshore.
It's even hard to remember how Brentwood was in that respect. You know, what was here before they built that there, you know. You got a couple of people talking about it. One remembers it one way and one the other, you know.
How do you remember?
Well, I remember where the Brentwood, we call it the Brentwood Shopping Center, beautiful big home. The Geises lived there. Beautiful trees and stuff. And they knocked those down to pave that all over and make a shopping center on it. It was a sad thing.
Now, where would that have been in today's Brentwood?
Where the shopping center is here with Checkers is, that big shopping center. Yeah. That area was that property where that house was. Where Checkers.
But it went all the way back to they had Grant's store there. Never had any supermarkets in Brentwood to speak of. But it was a beautiful home. It was a man that had money, you know, before our age.
And his name was Geis, is that what you said?
His name was Alcare, but his daughter's married name was Geis. And she had 2 youngsters, went to Brentwood School. Her boy was the same age as my son. But then I guess she moved out of Brentwood and they sold the property, I guess, to a developer. And it was a sad thing to see all those beautiful trees.
The change in Brentwood is just things that they kind of hurt.
Yeah.
You see all the woods going and the houses going
You're talking
up.
about the developments, which really began
Yeah.
during the
50s.
I guess late 50s and then through the
early
60s.
50s, 1953,
Early
4,
50s.
yes.
Right. That's when they had to build the first school.
And then you saw Brentwood grow to a district of, I think it was about 23,000 students at its largest.
Right.
Brentwood has many kids.
Brentwood has many kids, which we still to this day have. And one day we'd like to pull that off the shelf and show it to our members because it's still, that was at the heyday of the growth of Brentwood.
Right.
And isn't it interesting how you look now at Bayshore, which one day was the shopping mecca, has gone,
That's right.
was coming out of a slump of many years,
Yeah.
where it had virtually gone downhill because of other
Right.
other buildings, other development, the
Right.
malls and so on, that have
Right.
killed
Right.
the small town. And yet there is still enormous potential and change and growth. And that's what we're a part of. That's fortunately why we're able to sit
Right.
and talk about all
Bayshore
this.
School District did not grow like Brentwood, though. That did not. I don't think the Bayshore School District is anywhere as near. And I thought it would be someday, because it's also a large area, covers bright waters, and it just seemed to me that would grow just like Brentwood did. It did not do
It
that.
didn't.
No,
Any theories as to why that was the case?
not really.
No.
No, there were a lot of more well-to-do people on the
Right.
south side of Main Street in Bayshore that they didn't sell their property and allow a developer to take over, and
There was
that's
more
what happened
control of
here.
that. Brightwood was an incorporated village.
Mm-hmm.
You know, made it a lot of difference.
Brentwood also, from my experience, has always struggled to find its own identity because there are so many competing identities. We have postal districts and fire districts and
That's right.
all these boundaries that intersect
right.
one another, that when you try to define the community, it's virtually been the school district that has given
Right.
Brentwood its identity.
Right, right.
So, which makes us different in a way than some other communities, suburban communities. Have you, either one of you, ever been politically active in your organization?
My father
No.
gave us enough of that.
He did.
Yes.
So there was a role model for you
Yes.
that said
In
enough is enough.
reverse,
fact, so
we
reverse.
saw how little he gained, although he
A little
strives very
respect,
hard.
actually, for some of the things that he tried to do, for the town. It just seems like.
And he did
it's
a lot of
waste.
things also as far as the tax was concerned for
Right.
the elderly people.
He was
My
the one
father
who
was-
instigated the 65-year and older, where they,
school property tax
Right.
deduction.
so that the senior citizens would have a break on their school taxes. He never benefited from it himself because I guess you had to have a
Didn't-
certain. I don't really know what the reason was for that.
You had to have a certain income.
Is that what it was?
You know.
But your father was clearly very community oriented, very
Yes,
service
yes,
oriented.
right. From the very
Was yours a
beginning.
religious family?
Oh, yes.
Was
Episcopalians we were,
Episcopalian,
yes. Yes. Brothers,
My
in the
brother
early
was-
days, they took care of the church furnace and
Yeah,
got
went
down there first and those kind of things. They were toward Sunday school. We all did those things.
and the reason I asked that is because somebody who was so community oriented, it strikes me that his values must have also been very spiritual in nature
Right.
as well.
My
And-
brother, that was a prisoner of war, became a priest in the Episcopalian
Yes, he
place
is.
when he
To this
returned.
day, he is.
And is he still
Yes, he is.
practicing?
No, he's
might have-
retired.
He's retired.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
No,
He'll always be a
well,
Very
priest.
interesting. Yeah, yes. Okay. Let's see what we haven't talked about a number of things. You've known a lot of wonderful people. Some of them have made an enormous impression on you, and I'm not going to ask you to limit it to one or to talk about many, but could you mention some or one of the people who has been memorable in your experience or in your life?
It's a hard thing to do. Right.
Because we were family oriented. Those are the people, Mom and Dad, who were the people you tried to.
I guess my
Emulate.
question is not specific, and I'm thinking about in your work.
in work.
Were there, because you've met
Yeah.
so many people and worked with so many people, some of them more memorable than others. And I wondered if there was somebody that you would want to single out and say, well, I remember so-and-so, and I remember.
Yeah,
This
I
about
remember quite a few, but as I remember them, everybody helped one another back in those days.
All right.
So,
You think that's different from the way it is today? You don't
yes,
see
I
it the
do. I
same
think
way?
there's more selfishness today.
Hmm.
Self-centered people. Yeah.
That is an interesting comment, because recently I heard somebody say as we get older, the world gets smaller and we become more absorbed with our own small petty things. And what here I have somebody sitting in front of me who has a few years experience, and you are saying just the reverse. You are saying that people, in your opinion, today, who are far younger than you are, tend to look at things in a more narrow and selfish
do.
way.
Mm-hmm.
You would agree?
Yeah.
I think you get more broad-minded as you grow older.
Okay.
Yes,
Or more
I do.
tolerant, or
Yes.
what?
I think those things are supposed to happen to
I
us.
think so.
Yeah, I
It's
do
a good
too.
thing.
Otherwise, you'd be too frustrated.
Yeah. Maybe we can ask you what your last assignment was at the time that you left your active professional life.
Something on the job, you mean?
Yeah, what was the last assignment that you
Well,
had?
I was still with the Northeast School,
Mm-hmm.
working for the principal.
Okay.
I worked for 4 principals.
Eleanor's starting to laugh. She's thinking of something, I think.
No.
No? Okay.
She's talking about the pictures.
The picture.
Yeah, that's another thing. We had looked at those, you had brought in some wonderful photographs before of early Brentwood. What were we looking at when what were those pictures of?
You know, one of them was where the high school building stands now, was a farmland. I think it was owned by the St. Joseph's Academy. They owned a lot of property in Brentwood. And we had a picnic there. We weren't living in Brentwood at the time, but we came out to Brentwood to visit, and that was on our trip. I don't know whether it was on the way here or on the way home. But that's one of them, and then there was another one.
One of the photographs was taken right on these grounds where the high school is. Now this St. Joseph's property extended this far?
Oh yes,
west?
They had 40 acres up Fifth Avenue.
Oh
They
my!
call it the 40 acres.
And the other pictures, there was one with the waterworks.
That's right. Right.
It was across the street from
right
that,
across where the tower.
where the tower is now. That was also farmland.
And that went up on both sides of the railroad track at that point, or just up to the railroad track?
Up to the railroad.
Uh-huh. Okay. And there are some other photographs that we looked at. Do you remember what that you brought?
2 photographs of our home where we moved. We moved here to Brentwood, and it was very rural, very pretty landscape for those days.
Actually, someone back in the early 1900s, I believe, Miles, planted the white pine trees.
That was done by Recorder Realty Company.
That's right, yeah.
That's why they called it Brentwood.
Up and down all the streets, even the streets that should have been cut and probably had been cut through at one time and allowed to grow over. There really only were about 4 streets from the Motor Parkway to Suffolk Avenue that were paved at that time. But all the streets were covered with, or lined with these white pines.
And that was done by a realty company. It's called the Brentwood.
They called it Brentwood and the Pines. There weren't the scrub pines that they were talking about, I don't think.
It was white pines that they imported from up in New England, because they're not native to Brentwood, to Long Island, or nice to Brentwood. It was beautiful.
And they were on that side street, that Perry Street, the dirt road that was in that photograph that they had, the house when they first bought it.
Now, have they all been gone? Are they all gone?
A lot of them
Some
have been
places
gone.
you still see
Washington
some.
Avenue still has some
Yes.
up and around,
Beautiful trees
Yeah.
along Washington Avenue. Yeah.
but they aren't going to be there very long because the lighting company needs to
Is that
do
right?
their little trimming every once in a while to get rid of the.
Yes.
And they are dangerous for the wire's sake. I guess they're breaking off because they're rotting inside. People are putting signs on them, making holes all over them.
That was another
That
thing my
hurts when
father
you
was trying
see
to do,
that.
was get them to put the high tension lines under the ground so we wouldn't have all that.
Yes. Yes.
He wasn't successful in that area.
No. And I'll bet they still argue the same way with the cost of that.
All right.
Right.
Except when developments begin from scratch, then
Yeah,
they're
that's when
probably
they should have
different.
done it. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There are, in anyone's life, there are the happiest of times, and there are, they say the worst of times, the best of times, and the worst of times. During your years in Brentwood, among the best of times would have been what times for either one of you?
Family get-together.
That's right. I was going to say that too.
10
My
of
dad
us
played the piano, and I have heard from friends in my teenage years that their parents used to think that our house was a, what do they call it, a speakeasy. Because when family got together, or aunts and uncles from the city to visit there on that house on Clark Street, he played the piano and we were singing, and I guess it sounded like a speakeasy,
But he also engaged a lot of other people that he got to know with
Right.
playing the drums, playing the spoons. So we always had happy times as family, really. And what close neighbors. There were only 4 houses on the block when we moved there. And but those are the happy times. We always celebrated birthdays. We always got together on Sundays, so it was, you didn't have, not that there was any place much to go, but you didn't have to.
There wasn't any place
worry.
to go.
Yeah. Was there was the most difficult time that you can relate to us in terms of your experience in Brentwood, a time that was very, very difficult to get through?
As far as personal or the town itself?
Well, either
Just
way
the
that comes
World
to
War
mind.
Yeah.
World War
Because
II.
that was a hurting to have the brother go into the service and then 2 years not know where he was, first of all.
Yes.
And it just
Mhm.
wasn't a happy time for sure.
No.
Did you find it difficult, now you were both working in the system, to deal with the pressures of the enormous growth that Brentwood experienced during those years? I would imagine there must have been enormous pressure on everybody in the system to accommodate the flood of new residents to Brentwood and into the schools.
They
We kind of grew with it.
You didn't have a problem with
I would say that Ruth probably did with being in the front office, but because of the library, they built the library. They took the cafeteria and built a new cafeteria on Northeast School after I was there for a couple of years. And the library was then the cafeteria that had been. They put the library in there. And those were nice changes. Everything seemed to me, it just got better. It wasn't more pressure.
Did I cut you off when you were starting
No.
to say something? Is there something that either one of you would like to have accomplished that you either didn't have a chance to do, or didn't have time to do, or didn't get to do? Or is it so far behind you at this point you don't even think about it
I would like to
anymore?
have learned how to play the piano.
Is that right? Okay. All right.
And
I
I'm still
did, but I'd
struggling
still
with
like
that.
to do
Well, you're still trying then.
Yeah.
Okay. And Eleanor, what about you? Is there something
She
No,
that
can't
I
play the
still do.
piano.
you can play?
I have my computer and my organ and my grandchildren.
Right.
Those are,
Great.
so I have nothing to complain about.
Wonderful. Wonderful. We've talked about a great many things, and we've talked about a lot of history. But invariably, we're going to walk out that door, and we're all going to remember things that we didn't talk
That's
about.
right.
Is there something that you've thought of that you'd like us to address before we pull a wrap around this wonderful experience here? Is there something question that I didn't ask you? Is there something that you'd like us to address?
I can't either. Not really.
I
just
would
wish
love to
that
be
the
able to
children
pull a
cared
funny
about
story
books
out
and
of the
things
hat,
that-
but I that whenever I try to do that, it always falls flat. So I'm not even going to try to pull a funny story out of the hat, or ask you to do the same. I can tell you that it has been a joy for me to be here and an honor to be sitting in this position and talking to both
It's been
of
a
you.
pleasure to be here.
And
John.
I hope that the folks who are listening, who have stayed with us here, have enjoyed some of your stories as much as I've enjoyed hearing them. And I want to thank particularly the staff here at the high school who has given so generously of their time to make this opportunity possible for us.
That was
Fellas,
nice.
thank you very, very much for being here. And we look forward, since this is our first opportunity in doing this kind of a presentation, to have many opportunities to do it again. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
And thank you.